Hello, and thank you for joining us. My name is Brianna Bell, and I am pleased to welcome you to the latest webinar from Advantage Technologies, Preventing Downtime and Data Loss with High Availability for RightFax. Jeff Kunstler, our Vice President of Technical Services, is going to walk you through how RightFax can be configured to ease disaster recovery and promote high availability. Jeff has over 20 years experience working with RightFax, and many of you have worked with Jeff on projects in the past. With that, I will turn the webinar over to Jeff.
Thank you, Brianna. So let's begin. As Brianna just mentioned, my name is Jeff Kunstler, and I will be hosting today's webinar, Preventing Downtime and Data Loss with High Availability for RightFax. A little bit about Advantage. So we're a leading provider and integrator of RightFax, CloudFax, and document delivery solutions for over 20 years. We are number one in RightFax sales and support in North America, and 2017 OpenTech's top 3 value-added resellers. Our support desk is based out of North America, and it's important to know that you will only get an engineer based out of North America. We do not outsource our help desk. And we have a global customer base including Fortune 100 companies, major hospitals, and government agencies. So why is preventing downtime and data loss so important? Imagine this. It's 4:30 in the morning and your cell phone is ringing. Your system analyst quickly tells you that your system is down and doesn't know when it'll be back up. The East Coast has just started their workday and your organization is now unable to service customers, address patient billing, or check the status of a critical order. This isn't just inconvenience. This is how your organization loses thousands or even millions of dollars on lost orders and customers. So first, let me explain the difference between high availability and disaster recovery. High availability is a technology design that minimizes IT disruptions by providing IT continuity through redundant or fault-tolerant components. Disaster recovery is a pre-planned approach for reestablishing IT functions and their supporting components at an alternative facility when normal repair activities cannot recover them in a reasonable time frame. RightFax supports both high availability and disaster recovery, and during this presentation we'll go into details on both. Next, we'll go over a few different deployment options that promote high availability and aid in disaster recovery. So, in a RightFax single server deployment, all RightFax components are hosted on one server. Other required components such as SQL, MSMQ, and the image store can either be hosted directly on the fax server or on a separate server. On all but the smallest RightFax implementations, we recommend SQL not be installed on the RightFax server due to the additional load SQL will put on the system resources. Most single server deployments leave both the image store and MSMQ services on the RightFax application server. When we move the doc transport service to a remote server, we reduce the workload of the application server, and although we still have a single point of failure, we can still receive faxes if the application server fails. A big advantage of this configuration is the ability to install the RightFax doc transport server or servers in a remote office and eliminate the need to run SIP over the WAN. This will greatly increase the reliability of your faxes. So in this slide, you see the RightFax application server installed with a local doc transport service. Faxes are answered and sent from the PBX installed in the New York City office. Since we use the real-time protocol to transmit the faxes between these offices, the faxes are susceptible to network latency and lost packets. This will lead to a higher failure rate of faxes. So in this example, we installed a remote doc transport on a separate server than the RightFax server, but it's still installed in the same data center. The advantage of this configuration is you take the workload off the application server, but you are still transmitting real-time traffic over the WAN. Now in this example, we move the RightFax doc transport server to the New York City office. This is the optimal configuration since we are no longer transmitting real-time traffic over the WAN, and instead just doing a simple file copy of the fax to the RightFax application server. A single server with a cold spare RightFax implementation allows for you to license a second RightFax server with a 50% discount and run it as a cold spare in the same or another data center. The biggest negative with this single server with a cold spare is historical faxes will not be available on the cold spare system. Since a cold spare uses a separate database, there is no way to replicate the faxes between them. After the outage, resyncing your primary RightFax server will require downtime while you copy data from the spare to the primary server. We usually don't recommend a single server with a cold spare due to the downtime needed to keep the data in sync between systems. A RightFax collective is the best solution for true high availability and disaster recovery. Since you can have up to 12 RightFax application servers geographically located in multiple data centers, you can truly load balance all RightFax services and network connections. The biggest challenge with a collective is the replication of SQL and RightFax images. As you can see from the diagram to the right, all the RightFax application servers are connected to a single SQL server and image store. RightFax 10.6 and greater does have the ability to write images to concurrent image stores, but it cannot write to concurrent SQL databases. So it is important to have a solid SQL replication plan in place to eliminate a single point of failure. So some of the benefits is you can scale out, as I mentioned before, up to 12 servers. That really makes it scalable. Geographic redundancy is very important. As offices grow and you open up remote office, you have the ability to put multiple RightFax servers in multiple offices and have them load balance between. And as I mentioned, no downtime due to a single failure server or a single server failure, because it's load balanced and the other ones will take over the load. And if you're using a network load balancer, you can have automatic client failure. This does require an additional license. It's called the Shared Services module, and you can talk to your sales rep if you're looking to purchase it. Now in this example, we have a 2-node RightFax collective with remote dock transport service. This would be the ideal configuration since it provides the most redundancy, high availability, and business continuity. So as you can see, you have your Dallas data center on the left with a full application server and a separate remote dock transport server. On the right in the New York City office, you have the active RightFax application server, also active, your remote dock transport, and your IPPBX. So in this case, you would actually have the remote dock transport in New York City talking to the IPPBX, and the one on Dallas can, through the WAN, talk to it, or if you had an IPPBX or maybe a SIP provider, you can also talk to it directly through Dallas for redundancy. It's really up to you. We'll now discuss some additional strategies that we recommend to our clients to help them run a more reliable RightFax system. We'll look at different techniques to eliminate as many single points of failure as possible. Traditionally, RightFax has a single folder-based image store where all fax images are stored. This presents a problem if the image store becomes unavailable for any reason. So new with RightFax 16.2 is the optional SQL image store module. This module moves images from the file system to the SQL database. You have the option to use a separate database from the RightFax metadata, or if you wanted to, you can actually still use the RightFax database. We do recommend a separate database. This can really help with HA and DR since most SQL implementations are already using some form of redundancy, and now you'll get the same redundancy with your RightFax images, and you do not have to worry about replicating the RightFax image store. Replicating Windows file systems is often a challenge. We have tested the SQL image store and there is no degradation of service, and in some cases you will see improved performance. An additional license is required for this module. Okay, so now let's talk about the SQL database and how it can be deployed. RightFax can be integrated with SQL in multiple ways. For very small implementations of 8 channels or less, you can use the built-in SQL Express. We also support the full version of SQL installed on the fax server, but we don't recommend it due to additional resources that it will use. The best way to leverage your company's existing SQL infrastructure to take advantage of the SQL tools for HA and DR, including database mirroring, log shipping, and SQL availability groups. RightFax supports both VMware and Hyper-V, and when installed in a virtual environment, you can reap the benefits of virtualization such as hardware failover, replication, and snapshots. In the past, fax servers had to be physical due to the fact they had to accommodate a physical card. As virtualization became the norm, the market responded by creating a virtual fax board that you can run on a virtual server. By using the SL140 virtual fax board, your RightFax system can also reap the benefits of virtualization, and you no longer have to worry about specialized hardware. Currently, a majority of our customers are running RightFax on a virtual server. So as I mentioned earlier, RightFax does support geo-redundancy when using a RightFax collective. When running your fax lines over SIP trunks, you also have the ability to instantly reroute your inbound DID numbers to anywhere in the United States. This is extremely important for disaster recovery. If your primary data center is down, your redundant RightFax servers will automatically start receiving your inbound DID calls. This is extremely complicated and often not possible when using legacy TDM connections such as PRI lines. Please contact your RightFax account manager for recommendations of T38 fax optimized SIP providers that can offer you all these advantages. Finally, let's talk about telephony options. With redundant fax gateways, you remove your reliance on a single pipe to the PSTN. The most common outage for our RightFax customers is telecom related. Having redundant fax gateways with redundant telecom connections remove the single point of failure at the telephony level. For example, if a T1 line goes down right outside your main data center and you have multiple fax gateways, you will still be able to send and receive faxes. Okay, now let's discuss some takeaways. The first thing we talked about is it's important to identify all single points of failure and do your best to eliminate them. Redundancy allows for application continuity, and the best method for redundancy is a RightFax collective. We always recommend data replication on the SQL level and on the shared data directory. And now the new SQL image store simplifies that because you don't have to worry about replicating your shared data directory because your images are now stored within SQL.